When I was 11 years old, I watched my stepdad ride a mud-caked bike into a thunderstorm in the middle of the Utah desert. We hadn't had water in almost a full day, and we were completely lost. But being lost wasn't the worst part. Not by a long shot. Something was out there with us. Something that followed us once we left the safety of the canyon. And by the time we reached our van, it was already waiting for us. We were on day 5 of a backpacking trip through Grand Gulch in southern Utah. If you've never been there, it's not the kind of place you go without serious planning. It's miles of red sandstone walls, twisted slot canyons, ancient ruins, and near silence. You're more likely to stumble across 1,000-year-old cave drawings than another human being. Our plan was to enter from one trailhead and exit from another. To make the loop work, my stepdad had stashed an old mountain bike in a shallow ravine about 8 miles from our van. He was supposed to ride it back once we exited, grab the van, and come pick us up. But none of that worked out the way it was supposed to. On the last day, we climbed out of the canyon via a barely visible trail. It was steeper than we expected, loose rock, crumbly ledges, and no shade. When we finally crested the rim, the world looked wrong. The landmarks didn't match what we had on our topo map. We were supposed to be near a small bluff, but instead we were in rolling desert hills, miles off course. We checked the compass. My mom and stepdad argued quietly. I stood there, silent, watching a single dust devil snake across the horizon. There was no water. And we'd already passed the last pothole back in the canyon. My stepdad finally pointed and said, "That way, if we keep going west, we'll hit the old service road. Eventually. Eventually." We had maybe 2 power bars left between the 3 of us, and less than half a liter of water. We walked until the sun dipped and the desert turned cold. The wind made this low howling sound as it scraped across the ground. That night, we slept beneath a crooked pinyon pine that looked like it had been split in 2 by lightning. We shared the last of our food, 1 bar split 3 ways. I remember how dry my tongue felt, like I had been eating sand. We didn't make a fire, we didn't speak much, but I couldn't sleep. At some point, I sat up and looked out into the dark. There were no stars, just clouds and wind. And then I heard something. Not footsteps exactly, but movement, something soft, somewhere out in the sagebrush. I remember thinking, animals avoid people, they avoid camps, especially when there's no food. But this thing, it got closer. I didn't wake my parents, I just laid there, listening, until I heard it again. A little closer, a little heavier, then nothing. The next morning, we packed up quickly. My stepdad didn't look rested. Neither did my mom. After an hour of walking, we found the road. It started as a faint path, then grew clearer, 2 dusty ruts winding through the hills. Relief flooded over us. It felt like salvation. That's when I noticed my mom was limping a little. Blisters, maybe dehydration. She was pale, but we kept going. And after what felt like forever, we reached the spot where we'd stashed the bike. Right where we left it, wedged behind a cluster of rocks, half covered in dirt. My stepdad looked at the sky. A storm was rolling in. "I'll go. You two stay here and rest," he said, already brushing the dirt off the tires. We watched him disappear down the road just as the rain started falling. The drizzle turned to a full downpour, and weirdly, we were happy about it because we were so damn thirsty. We held out our hands, letting the water trickle down our wrists into our mouths. Lightning cracked somewhere off in the distance. We sat under the overhang of a rock wall and waited and waited. I must have asked a dozen times, shouldn't he be back by now? The sky turned a sickly shade of greenish gray. And that's when we started walking. My mom kept saying, "It's not far. He'll be there waiting." But she didn't sound sure, and I kept thinking back to that noise in the desert the night before. The way it had moved, calm, deliberate, too heavy for a coyote. The parking lot was completely empty, except for one thing. Our van, sitting awkwardly at the far end, driver's side door open, stepdad pacing in front of it, soaking wet, yelling something we couldn't hear. We ran toward him. "The battery's dead," he said, pointing at the van like it had betrayed him. "I rode 8 miles through the damn mud, and it's dead." He grabbed the bike again. "There's a highway about 6 miles from here. I'll flag someone down." He didn't wait for a reply, just mounted the bike and rode off into the mud. We waited in the van, and that's when things got wrong. The air inside smelled musty, like old water and rotting leaves, which didn't make sense. It was our van. It hadn't rained for days before this. My mom said something didn't feel right. She cracked the door and sat halfway outside. The inside of the glove box was damp, like someone had splashed water inside. And the seats, they looked like someone had been sitting in them recently. But they were soaked. That didn't make sense. The windows had been closed. The bike stash wasn't even near a road. No one else should have found it. I sat in the back seat and looked out at the desert, and that's when I saw them. Footprints in the red mud, leading to the van, from the opposite direction. They weren't my stepdad's. Too wide, too flat, barefoot. I stepped outside. There were more. Circling around the back, my mom didn't see them. She was looking toward the highway, hoping to spot my stepdad coming back. But something told me not to say anything. I just stood there, scanning the desert, and then I saw it, a figure. Far out in the brush, not moving, just standing there, facing us. Not a hiker, no pack, no gear, just a shape, human, unmoving. I blinked. Gone. About half an hour later, a white truck pulled into the lot. Stepdad was in the back, mud from head to toe, shivering. The ranger got out, older guy, quiet, helped us jump the van. Didn't say much, but he looked uneasy when we told him where we'd camped. That area's known for weird stuff, he finally said, barely above a whisper. People see things, hear things. I asked what he meant. He just said, "Next time, don't leave the canyon. They stay up on the rim." We didn't talk much on the drive to Blanding. Didn't tell the mechanic about the footprints or the shape I saw in the distance. But I still think about it, about how the van smelled like it had been used, about the footprints in the mud, about how that figure didn't run, didn't hide. It just stood there, watching, waiting. Some places don't want you to leave, and some things follow you home. In the vast, silent woods of the Pacific Northwest, a solo cyclist embarks on a journey of self-discovery. But as the days grow shorter and the nights colder, he finds himself ensnared in a nightmare far from civilization. A few years ago, I decided to take a break from the monotony of daily life. I loaded my bicycle with camping gear and set off on a cross-country trip across the United States. My goal was simple: to experience the freedom of the open road and the serenity of nature. I preferred wild camping, finding secluded spots in the woods where I could rest undisturbed. By mid-November, I found myself in southern Washington state. The days were getting shorter, and the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. Despite the cold, I was making good progress, averaging about 50 miles a day. One afternoon, I began to feel a slight discomfort in my stomach. At first, I dismissed it as hunger or perhaps something I ate earlier. As dusk approached, I found a suitable spot to set up camp, a clearing surrounded by dense trees, far from any roads or trails. After pitching my tent and going through my usual routine, I noticed that my appetite had vanished. This was unusual, given the physical exertion of the day. I lay down, hoping that rest would alleviate the discomfort. As night fell, my condition worsened. Nausea gripped me, and I found myself sitting up repeatedly, ready to unzip the tent and vomit. Around 11:30 p.m., I finally did. I rinsed my mouth with the limited water I had and tried to sleep, but sleep was elusive. At 2:30 a.m., I vomited again. By 4:30 a.m., I was awake, dehydrated, and exhausted. I realized I needed to reach the nearest town about 30 miles away. As dawn broke, I packed up and prepared to leave. Just as I was about to set off, I noticed a flat tire. In my weakened state, repairing it took longer than usual. By the time I was ready, rain had begun to fall. I donned my jacket, turned on my lights, and started pedaling. Each mile was a struggle. I was cold, wet, and drained. My stomach churned, and I had no water left. The forest around me felt oppressive, the trees closing in, the silence deafening. After hours of grueling effort, I reached the town. I bought some easy-to-digest food and checked into a motel. The receptionist, perhaps sensing my distress, allowed me to check in early. I took a long shower and slept for 13 hours. The next day, feeling somewhat better, I continued my journey to a larger city 60 miles away. I spent the day exploring, but the following morning, the illness returned. I stayed in my hostel room, battling the symptoms. After a day of rest, I felt rejuvenated and ready to continue. Weeks later, as I recounted my journey to a fellow traveler, he mentioned a local legend about the woods in southern Washington. Stories of hikers falling ill, experiencing hallucinations, or disappearing altogether. Some spoke of an unseen presence that watched from the shadows. I couldn't help but wonder, was my illness purely coincidental, or had I encountered something beyond understanding in those woods? To this day, I avoid discussing that night, but sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I feel that same oppressive presence, as if something followed me out of those woods and never let go. When people think of camping with their family, they imagine s'mores, hikes, and unplugging from the world. But when we went to Franconia Notch in New Hampshire this past July, what we experienced felt less like a vacation and more like surviving something that didn't want us to leave. I was feet away from a black bear and later trapped inside a collapsing campsite during a storm that seemed almost sentient. But the worst part wasn't the bear, it wasn't the wind. It was what I saw in the trees that last night, something I still don't talk about unless I have to. We arrived at the campground in the heart of Franconia Notch late on a Sunday afternoon. The place was breathtaking. Sharp mountain ridges cut into the sky, and pine trees whispered like they knew secrets. I came with my wife, our 3 kids, and enough gear to last a week. Our site was tucked back deeper than most, away from the main road, which I liked. I wanted quiet. I got it, but not the kind I expected. There was something about the stillness in that area. No birds chirping, no crunch of squirrels in the brush, just silence. But we shrugged it off and started exploring. The basin, Flume Gorge, we even hit the Ridge Trail. It was incredible. For the first couple of nights, we'd return exhausted, eat late, and crash. But by the second night, something changed. We got back just after sunset from a long hike. My feet were shot, and the kids were half asleep by the fire. My wife and I finished dishes at the spigot, and I was doing my usual routine, loading food into the car to keep it from attracting wildlife. And then I heard a crack. Not a twig, something heavier. I looked up, and there he was. A massive black bear. He was closer than I could have ever imagined, maybe 10 feet away. Close enough I could smell him. Like wet fur and sour garbage. He wasn't growling or charging. He just watched me, slow and patient. Almost curious. I froze. I had a metal pot in one hand and a big spoon in the other. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed them together, hard, right in his face. The sound cracked the silence like a gunshot. He jumped back, startled, but didn't run. Not right away. He circled. I banged the pot again, this time yelling. Finally, he turned and padded back into the woods, but he didn't go far. He lingered at the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting. I spent the next 2 hours pacing the camp, banging the pot every time I saw a flicker of movement. That bear came back 3 times that night. What scared me wasn't that he was brave, it was that he acted like he'd done this before, like he knew what we were. By the 4th night, things felt better. We went into a nearby town to see the 4th of July fireworks. The weather was perfect, sunny, hot, not a cloud in sight. The kids laughed like they hadn't in months. We got ice cream. It felt like we'd shaken off the strangeness from earlier in the week. When we got back to camp, the air was still. Too still. My wife noticed it first. No breeze, the trees didn't move, the frogs and crickets were silent. Around midnight, that changed. The wind came first, out of nowhere. 1 second it was dead calm, the next, our tent was flattening under gusts strong enough to lift our tarps. Then came the rain. It came sideways, soaking everything instantly. Water started pooling inside the tent, soaking the floor. I grabbed my son and we ran out to try and secure a tarp over the top. As we fumbled with the ropes, I looked around, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Tents were flying. People were abandoning their sites, piling into their cars and driving off, headlights slicing through the sheets of rain. A few tents whipped up into the trees like they were paper. One of them caught on a branch and dangled there, ripped and flapping. It looked like a body for a second. I still don't know if it was. Tree branches the size of my arm rolled through the camp like they were alive. And the trees, the huge, towering ones, they were bending. So far, they nearly touched the ground. We were stuck. No way I was driving 14 hours back to Pennsylvania in this storm, and I wasn't about to leave everything behind. But it wasn't just wind and rain. There was something else. Between lightning flashes, I started seeing things, figures, not people, not animals, shapes, in the trees, up high. At first, I told myself it was shadows, maybe blown branches, but one flash lit up the tree line, and I swear I saw something clinging to the side of a pine. Something with long, jointless arms. No face. When the lightning hit again, it was gone. My son saw it too. He just looked at me and said, "Dad, what was that?" I didn't answer. What could I say? That whole night, we huddled inside the tent. I didn't sleep, not even a minute. Every few minutes, I'd hear the creak of something big swaying above us, and that sound, low and guttural, like a breath coming from deep in the woods. By morning, the place was a disaster. Telephone poles were down along the road out. A ranger's truck had a tree limb crushed through the windshield. Half the campground had evacuated. There were claw marks on a cooler near our neighbor's site, but no footprints, just marks that sank deep into the plastic like it had been squeezed. Everyone was talking about the storm, but no one talked about the other stuff. Not directly. An older man from the next site over said, "That wasn't just a storm. Something came through with it." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head and said, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but the truth was, I had. We packed fast and left. My wife didn't ask why I was driving so fast. I think she felt it too. The weird tension, like we had gotten away clean. We made it a couple hours into Vermont before I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I pulled into a small farm with a little market out front. My wife and the kids went inside while I leaned my seat back and shut my eyes for just a minute. In that minute, I had a dream, except it felt real. I was back in Franconia Notch. Only it wasn't the campground anymore. It was the same trees, but they were all wrong. Bent backward, breathing. And that faceless thing, it was crouched in the tree above our tent, watching us sleep it down, inches from my son, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I woke up choking. We made it home, but it followed me. The first night back, I walked into the kitchen around 2 a.m. and looked out the window. There was something in our yard, in the dark, still, watching. I haven't gone camping since. I want to believe it was all stress, that the bear, the storm, the things I thought I saw, it was just my brain on edge. But sometimes when the wind picks up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear that pot clanging again, like something's still out there waiting for me to come back, and maybe next time I won't get away.